Dude, what is that?
Yeti. I'm not kidding. That thing's, we've seen it multiple times.
Oh my God, oh my God. It's coming over here. It's coming.
Recorded in October 2004, deep within Northern California's Six Rivers National Forest, two field researchers set a Bushnell HD trail camera on the edge of a narrow clearing. At 11:43 p.m., with ambient temperatures at -1 degree Celsius and wind speeds below 2 miles per hour, the camera, mounted roughly 6 feet off the ground and angled slightly downward, triggered automatically. Its infrared sensor captured a massive upright figure crossing the clearing about 40 feet away, moving calmly from left to right. Frame-by-frame analysis shows a subject standing just under 8 feet tall, its body covered in dense, dark hair that reflects faintly under IER. Using nearby fence posts for scale, later measured at 96 centimeters apart, frames 312 through 318 reveal an average stride length of approximately 52 inches. The figure's shoulders nearly match the width of a young pine tree behind it, and its long arms swing in a natural pendular motion as it walks. Its head tilts slightly downward, revealing a broad, sloping forehead and deep-set eye sockets before it turns and strides toward the timberline. The entire encounter lasted 59 seconds before the figure disappeared into the forest. When computer scientist Dr. Bryce Fox digitally enhanced the footage in 2023, muscle flexion in the quadriceps and deltoids became clearly visible beneath the fur, a level of anatomical realism that costume experts agree would have been nearly impossible to fake with early 2000 suit technology. Most striking, the clarified footage revealed a second, smaller figure in the background, partially obscured by brush, possibly a juvenile moving in parallel. Skeptics argue the footage could still depict a very tall human in a fabricated suit, or that the IR camera's motion blur may exaggerate its stride length. Yet given the measured distances, windless conditions, and visible muscular dynamics, researchers suggest the probability of a hoax is considerably reduced. Could new technology finally be revealing what we missed 20 years ago? And if that's true, what else might be hiding in plain sight? 15 years later, another researcher captured something extraordinary on thermal footage, a recording that some experts say is even harder to dismiss. In March 2019, during a pre-dawn elk population survey in Washington's Olympic National Forest, field researcher Dana Peters set up a FLIR Scout 3 thermal imager near a stand of old-growth Douglas firs. At precisely 2:47 a.m., with air temperatures hovering at 3 degrees Celsius and light winds under 3 miles per hour, the thermal unit captured a heat signature emerging from the tree line approximately 210 yards away. The camera was tripod-mounted at 5.5 feet, facing north-northeast, with a 24-degree field of view, allowing clear tracking as the subject crossed a natural game trail. The recording clearly reveals a massive, upright figure moving on 2 legs, its heat profile glowing bright white against the surrounding cold forest. Using nearby fir trunks for scale, measured later at an average of 32 inches in diameter, the figure's shoulder span is estimated at nearly 4 feet, and its height at roughly 8 feet. FLIR telemetry logged a surface temperature reading of 101.3 degrees Fahrenheit, consistent with a large endothermic animal. Most striking, the extremities register slightly cooler than the torso, suggesting robust peripheral blood flow, an adaptation seen in cold-weather mammals. For nearly 6 continuous minutes, the figure moves with deliberate, fluid steps, following a loose arc instead of a straight line. Analysts later measured an average stride length of 51 inches, derived by mapping the heat footprints against flagged survey markers, spaced every meter along the trail. Twice it pauses, appearing to examine tree boles and low rock outcrops, before kneeling briefly near a small water depression, likely drinking as its heat signature lowers toward the ground and ripples form on the surface. At the 5-minute mark, the figure stops, turns toward the thermal unit, and stays motionless for nearly 30 seconds before walking back into the timberline. Analysts confirmed the heat signature matched a living organism. Some critics suggested it could be a human in insulated gear, but the height, gait, and temperature pattern made that unlikely. And this was just the beginning. Months later, far from the mild forests of Washington, researchers would capture a winter encounter that challenged everything we thought we knew about this elusive species. In November 2021, deep in the backcountry of northern Alberta, professional hunting guide Mark Ellison retrieved footage from a Reconyx Hyperfire 2 trail camera placed nearly 30 miles from the nearest service road. The camera, mounted at 6 feet high and angled slightly downward over a game corridor, had recorded something extraordinary during one of the coldest nights of the year. The timestamp reads 11:43 p.m. Weather logs for that night confirm ambient temperatures at 10 degrees Fahrenheit with winds below 5 miles per hour and 8 inches of fresh snow on the ground. The conditions were harsh enough that no other human tracks were found anywhere within a 2-mile radius. In the footage, a towering, upright figure emerges from the tree line, moving left to right across the camera's 45-degree field of view at an estimated distance of 35 feet. Using nearby lodgepole pines for reference, Ellison later measured the subject's height at roughly 8 feet 2 inches. Its shoulders appear massive, spanning nearly half the width of the frame. Each step leaves a clear impression in the powder, and by comparing post-to-post spacing on a nearby barbed wire fence, measured later at 96 centimeters apart, the average stride length was calculated at 52 inches, nearly double that of an average human. The creature moves with surprising ease, showing no sign of struggle in the deep snow. Its arms swing naturally, and puffs of visible breath rise into the frigid air. Thick, dark hair covers its body, matted with frost along the lower legs, evidence it had been moving through snowpack for some time. Even more striking, this was not a single fleeting appearance. Over the next 2 hours, the figure triggered 3 additional cameras set up along the same remote route, suggesting it was not merely passing through, but actively traveling within its home range. Each recording captured the same fluid gait and unhurried pace, always sticking to the narrow trail corridor. Skeptics argued that the footage might show a tall person in insulated gear, but the stride length, lack of visible seams or gear reflectivity, and multiple camera angles all make that explanation unlikely. And just when it seemed the Alberta footage might be the most compelling evidence yet, the next case took an even darker turn. This time, an entire family would come face to face with something they could never forget. The video opens with both family dogs whining and pressing close to the fire, ears flat. Neither animal would step past the edge of the light. It was July 2020, a warm and humid night in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The family had camped at this remote site every summer for over a decade without problems. That evening, as the dogs stayed restless, a strong odor spread through the clearing, described by the teenage daughter as smelling like a wet dog mixed with something long dead. Minutes later, slow, heavy steps began circling the campsite. The sound of each step came from a different direction, stopping whenever someone moved or spoke, as if whatever was out there was listening. At 11:15 p.m., the youngest child pointed toward the tree line. Partly hidden behind a large oak was a figure standing upright. It was estimated to be at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark, tangled hair. Its eyes reflected the campfire light with a faint amber glow. The mother began recording on her phone. The 4-minute clip captured quiet conversation, the steady movement of something large in the brush, and several low, guttural vocalizations. The figure remained within view for roughly 10 minutes, occasionally shifting its stance or leaning from side to side as if observing. The father later described its behavior as cautious but curious, noting that it never made a move toward the camp. The next morning, 18-inch tracks were found in the soft soil, showing clear toe impressions and a stride far longer than a human's. The family's dogs had sensed it first, long before anyone else realized they were being watched. And this encounter wouldn't be the last. The next clip reveals what happened when the visits continued on the following nights. In June 2022, a retired logger living on a 40-acre property in the Cascade foothills of Oregon began noticing movement on his outdoor security system. He'd spent 2 decades surrounded by wildlife, black bears, elk, and the occasional cougar, and assumed at first it was nothing unusual. But the pattern that emerged over the following weeks began to unsettle him. The earliest clips, recorded at 2:17 a.m. with an Arlo Pro 4K security camera mounted 9 feet high and facing the eastern tree line, showed a dark, upright form moving laterally about 60 feet from the house. Ambient temperatures were 48 degrees Fahrenheit, with no wind, so foliage movement was minimal. At first glance, it could be mistaken for a black bear, but its height and frame, reaching to the middle of a 7-foot trail marker stake visible behind it, suggested something taller. Within days, the same sensor triggered again at nearly identical times. This time, the figure stayed farther back, but maintained a consistent distance from the house, stepping behind trees just as it passed into open view. Reviewing footage, the homeowner noted that it avoided the motion lights and positioned itself at the outer edges of the camera's fields of view, almost as if it understood where coverage ended. By early July, the logger realized the pattern was not random. In multiple clips, the figure paused behind a split trunk fir roughly 14 inches in diameter, giving him a reference for scale. Its shoulders spanned almost the full width of the trunk. On one occasion, it appeared briefly side-on, showing an arm length down past the mid-thigh region, well outside typical human proportions. The most disturbing clip, recorded on July 19th at 1:46 a.m., shows the figure synchronizing its movement with the homeowner's own. As he passed from window to window inside, the creature's silhouette shifted correspondingly at the tree line, maintaining visual contact for over 2 minutes. Even in the infrared footage, its outline was clear enough to distinguish a heavy, sloping head and thick upper torso, rather than a bear's rounded back. What began as routine wildlife curiosity had changed into something else, an animal, or perhaps something unknown, appearing at the same time of night, avoiding lights, and showing signs of deliberate observation. For the homeowner, the roles had reversed. He was no longer just watching his property. Something out there was now watching him. After months of sleepless nights, one question weighed on him constantly. If it had learned his habits and weak points, what was it waiting to do with that knowledge? The next clip reveals an encounter that would finally show just how close it had come. At 11:43 p.m. on a cool September night in 2021, a trail camera set up by a small group of campers in Virginia's George Washington National Forest automatically triggered. Ambient temperatures were about 52 degrees Fahrenheit with light wind under 3 miles per hour. The infrared unit was mounted roughly 5 feet off the ground, facing the edge of their clearing about 50 yards from the tents. When one of the campers reviewed the weekend footage later, he noticed something odd. In a clip that otherwise showed only the campsite and the glow of their fire, a pale, upright figure was just visible, partially hidden behind a mature pine trunk about 18 inches in diameter. Its outline was faint, but distinct enough to stand out from the tree. No one in the group had seen it in real time. Only the camera recorded it. Checking other clips from that night, the figure appeared in 3 separate recordings over a 20-minute window, always in the same sector of the frame and at roughly the same distance. It stood still for extended periods, seemingly positioned to observe the group's activity. Using the tree trunk for scale, the camper estimated the figure at over 7 feet tall, with disproportionately long arms and a narrow, pale torso. The most unsettling detail, in each clip, its placement corresponded with natural cover points along the tree line, as if deliberately choosing vantage spots. Critics suggested it could have been a person briefly illuminated by the campfire or a camera sensor anomaly. but the posture, consistency of location, and lack of heat bloom from any light source argue against simple motion blur or smoke. When the campers shared the clips online, other users responded with their own experiences, pale figures or shapes hidden in the backgrounds of trail footage, noticed only after the fact. It raised a troubling question. How often are people being watched without knowing? And if this clip made viewers uneasy, the next recording would escalate things further, because in that case, whatever was caught on camera wasn't just standing outside the perimeter. It was trying to get in. A family living on the edge of state land in rural Washington had been dealing with an unusual problem. Every few nights, they'd wake to find new damage along their wooden fence. Splintered boards, bent posts, and deep gouges that looked more like claws than tool marks. Black bears and trespassers were both common in the area, but these breaks didn't match the claw spacing or weight pattern of any bear they'd seen before. To get answers, the homeowners installed a security camera aimed directly at the fence line. It had an infrared mode and recorded continuously, saving motion-triggered clips to an SD card. They weren't expecting much more than another animal on film. The first clear footage came on an overcast October night, just before 2:34 a.m. In the infrared image, a faint, upright form appeared at the edge of the trees and moved deliberately along the fence. Based on the fence height and nearby posts, the shape stood well over 7 feet tall. It didn't lunge or crash through. Instead, it pressed at specific boards, paused, then moved to another section, almost like someone inspecting for weak points. At one point, the video showed a large hand-shaped appendage grasp the top of a fence post and rock it side to side. The creaking of the wood was captured on the microphone as the post flexed under the force. Near the gate, the figure leaned in and pushed steadily on a panel. The fence groaned but held. The low-resolution footage couldn't show details of the face or hands, but the relative scale and controlled strength were obvious. Then, without warning, it stopped. For nearly a full minute, the figure stood motionless in the same spot, then turned and walked back into the tree line with slow, deliberate steps. The same pattern repeated over the next several weeks. Each time, the camera recorded the being returning, testing different areas of the barrier, always at night, always methodically. When the family reinforced the weakened spots, the next visit would focus on fresh sections they hadn't yet repaired, as if the intruder had noticed the changes. What unsettled the family most wasn't only the damage, but the intelligence implied. Whatever it was, it seemed to learn and adapt. The security camera gave them evidence of a creature showing patience and planning rather than random aggression. By the time they'd collected multiple clips, the question had shifted. It was no longer if the fence would eventually fail, but why the being was so determined to get inside, and what might happen when it finally did. Unlike past sightings of lone silhouettes, this case suggested something more organized, maybe even family groups, living deep in the surrounding wilderness. On June 14, 2021, at 6:12 a.m., a motion-triggered Reconyx Hyperfire trail camera captured unusual activity along a remote creek in the Cherokee National Forest of Tennessee. Weather logs showed a calm, overcast dawn with air temperatures near 61 degrees Fahrenheit and little wind. The camera, mounted on a tripod at 5.5 feet high and facing northwest, had a 42-degree field of view covering roughly 120 feet of shallow water bordered by sycamores and laurel thickets. The recording shows a large bipedal figure, estimated over 8 feet tall based on creek bank markers measured later at 4.5 feet. It crosses the creek at a distance of about 35 yards from the lens, moving with deliberate, balanced steps, pausing briefly to glance back toward the tree line. Moments later, a smaller figure enters from the right edge of frame, about 5 feet tall, mirroring the adult's gait. Researchers inspecting the site documented 3 distinct track sets in soft mud. 2 adult-sized impressions averaging 17.5 inches in length, and 1 juvenile set averaging 9.5 inches. Stride spacing for the adult averaged 52 inches, while the juvenile tracked at 30 inches, consistent with proportional scaling. Some argued the smaller figure could have been light interference or a second person. However, the footprints showed clear natural features, wide forefoot pressure, and defined toes that don't line up with a human hoax. Perhaps they have found what we all look for, a place where the old ways are still respected and the ancient paths remain unbroken. Next, you're about to see footage that turns a quiet night into something unforgettable, and someone's home becomes the stage. On September 3, 2022 at 9:41 p.m., a rancher in rural Idaho received an alert from his Ring floodlight camera, mounted 8 feet high above the porch and facing his front paddock. The night was clear with temperatures around 54 degrees Fahrenheit and light wind under 4 miles per hour. The unit's 140-degree field of view covered the porch, paddock, and tree line about 25 feet from the lens. Expecting one of his horses near the fence line, he opened the live feed on his phone. Instead, the footage showed a motionless figure just beyond the edge of the porch light. At first glance, it resembled a human, but its scale was wrong. Even while hunched forward, its upper body rose above the 42-inch porch railing, placing its height at well over 7 feet. For nearly 10 minutes, the subject remained still. The camera recorded its head tilting side to side, as if reacting to sounds inside the house. The chest cavity could be seen expanding and contracting in slow breaths. Its arms appeared unusually long, extending well below the waistline, with heavy musculature visible in the shoulders and upper arms. When the rancher switched on the porch floodlight, the figure bolted across the paddock, covering ground with remarkable speed before disappearing into the tree line. The camera's microphone picked up no heavy footfalls, only the quick snap of brush as it moved. Skeptics later suggested it could have been a tall trespasser or light distortion at the edge of the infrared beam. But the measured scale against the railing, combined with the nearly silent retreat at that speed, remains difficult to explain. To this day, the rancher does not know how long it stood there before the sensor activated, and while he only saw it once, the next case takes place deep in the wilderness, where a solo camper would experience something much harder to ignore. On March 11, 2018, wilderness photographer Marcus Hale began a solo week-long trip in the forests of northern Michigan. Conditions were calm, with evening temperatures around 34 degrees Fahrenheit. His Sony Handycam, mounted on a tripod at his campsite beside a small lake, recorded his usual routine: setting up camp, cooking dinner, and describing the quiet. That calm changed at dusk. In his final clip, Marcus remarks on the silence: no bird calls or insects for hours. He dismisses it as weather, but his uneasy glances toward the tree line suggest otherwise. Later, inside his tent, Marcus quietly spoke about preparing for the next morning's shots, but then his expression suddenly shifted. He froze, raised a hand toward the camera, and appeared to be reacting to a sound just outside the tent. The microphone captures heavy, uneven footsteps circling the tent and deep, coarse breathing. For nearly half a minute, the steps stop directly outside. Marcus's own breathing grows shallow and fast. Then, a low, rumbling growl resonates through the nylon walls, followed by the tent shuddering as if brushed from outside. The camera shakes in his hands before the footage cuts to black. Marcus was reported missing 3 days later. Search teams found the tent still standing, gear undisturbed, but no trace of him. His camera was discovered 20 yards away in brush, the memory card still intact. Skeptics suggested the noises could have been a bear encounter or wind distortion. Yet the recording captured bipedal pacing rather than four-legged movement, and the tent showed no claw or tear marks typical of bears. Days later, his final video was uploaded, leaving thousands of viewers debating what stalked his camp that night. Next, the focus shifts from the forest to a cabin, where shadows and faint movements suggest something watching from just beyond the walls. In October 2020, a wildlife researcher living in a remote cabin in the Colorado Rockies began reviewing unusual clips from her Reconyx ultrafire cameras mounted at 6 feet high with a 40-degree field of view. Conditions that month were calm, with night temperatures averaging 41 degrees Fahrenheit. The first footage, taken at an estimated 40 yards from the lens, showed shadows moving north to south, paired with repeating whistles spaced about 12 to 15 seconds apart. Over the next weeks, the cameras consistently captured similar activity. Faint figures shifting through trees, sometimes pausing and tilting their heads as though listening. One sequence, captured at roughly 120 feet from the camera, revealed two shapes moving together, a taller figure striding ahead, with a smaller one mirroring its movements. Researchers measured 17-inch and 10-inch tracks in nearby soil, supporting the possibility of two individuals. Skeptics suggested the whistles might be birds or distant campers, and the figures just light distortion. Yet the recurring pattern, coordinated pacing, and footprint sizes made such explanations less convincing. Local Ute elders noted legends of forest beings that could mimic human voices to confuse travelers. For the researcher, the unsettling question was whether these figures were merely passing through or deliberately watching and attempting to communicate. Next, we shift from mountain forests to a lonely highway, where headlights reveal something standing in the open. On September 18, 2021, at 2:30 a.m., a Greyhound bus traveling Highway 20 through northern Idaho came to a sudden stop. The road was clear with dry conditions and temperatures near 46 degrees Fahrenheit. The vehicle's halogen headlights, 55-watt beams with a spread of about 200 feet, illuminated the curve ahead. Roughly 30 feet ahead of the bus, in the center of the lane, stood a massive upright figure. Witnesses later estimated its height between 8 and 9 feet, using the bus's 122-inch windshield frame for comparison. Its body was covered in dense, dark hair, its arms hanging well below the waist. For nearly 30 seconds, it remained motionless, turning its head deliberately toward the vehicle. Inside, 14 passengers reacted in different ways. Some screamed, others fumbled for phones, while several sat in stunned silence. The driver, with 2 decades on this route, later reported a steady reflection in the eyeshine, not a flash typical of deer, and described the figure's stance as deliberate, not startled. After the long stare, the figure stepped off the pavement with fluid motion, disappearing into the timberline. The microphone on one passenger's phone picked up no vocalizations, only the crunch of gravel under its stride. Skeptics suggested the event could have been a misidentified moose or even a roadside prank. Yet no antlers, 4-legged gait, or clothing were reported, and the scale against the bus's frame left many doubtful of those explanations. While details varied, some witnesses described the hair as brown, others as black. All 14 agreed on one point. The figure was aware of the bus and of them, watching just as intently as it was being watched. The next case shifts from asphalt to air, a drone's camera capturing movement in vast wilderness, hinting at something far larger than expected. In late September 2023, professional photographer Steve Johnson was conducting aerial surveys in Washington's North Cascades using a DJI Mavic 3 drone equipped with a 4x3 CMOS Hasselblad camera. Conditions were clear, with visibility exceeding 10 miles and temperatures around 57 degrees Fahrenheit. At an altitude of 400 feet, the drone recorded what appeared to be at least 9 upright figures moving in single file along a narrow mountain pass roughly 1,200 yards from the lens. Using surrounding alpine firs as reference, the leading individuals were estimated at over 8 feet tall, with smaller figures in the middle, averaging 5 to 6 feet. Their stride length, measured against trail switchbacks, averaged 50 inches. The formation suggested coordinated behavior. Larger figures appeared to flank the smaller ones, offering protection while maintaining steady pace. At least one subject seemed to carry an elongated object, though resolution prevented clear identification. The drone tracked the group for over an hour, capturing repeated footage of organized movement rather than random wandering. Skeptics suggested the figures could have been hikers distorted by distance or lighting. Yet thermal imaging from follow-up flights showed consistent heat signatures well above human body size, and the coordinated file mirrored migratory patterns rather than recreational travel. Local tribal elders, when shown the footage, confirmed the route matched traditional seasonal trails long used to cross the mountains. The recording ended as the group disappeared into a heavily forested valley. In the final moments, one towering figure briefly looked upward, almost as if aware it was being observed. This footage shows a huge figure standing at the edge of a forest clearing, remaining visible for several minutes in the early morning light. Unlike most wildlife, the subject made no attempt to hide or retreat, staying in clear view of the lens. On August 6, 2023, at 6:04 a.m., a hiker in Glacier National Park, Montana, recorded the moment using a Canon EOS 90D DSLR with a 135mm lens. Weather records showed calm air, scattered low cloud, and a temperature of 52 degrees Fahrenheit. The figure was captured from approximately 180 yards away, its height estimated at just over 8 feet, by comparison with lodgepole pines behind it. For nearly 2 minutes, the shape remained motionless, broad shoulders squared and arms hanging low. At one point, the head rotated toward the hiker's position, holding still for 30 seconds as if aware of being observed. On playback, the footage shows the right arm lifting slightly, a slow, deliberate motion, before the figure turned and walked back into the timberline with steady, unhurried steps. Skeptics later suggested the subject might have been a hiker in dark clothing, yet no other visitors were officially logged in that area at the time, and the apparent scale against trees in the background suggests something much larger than an average person. The hiker never saw it again, and to this day, no further sightings have been reported from that section of trail.